Story 1. This first story comes in 2 parts and was posted by Reddit user Crazy Turtle Mama. Part 1. There's something in the field. The Pacific Northwest is a place of wonder, and where we believe creatures of lore exist. There have been too many various sightings here. I wouldn't say demonic in nature, more like there are tangible beings. The skies are vast, the air is clean, and there is a mystic feeling here, almost as if when you turn a corner you might see a fairy. We never want to live anywhere else. I have been renting a farm-style house with my 2 grandchildren, my son and his fiancée, for almost 3 years now. We have a well under the back half of the house and a pump house behind us. There are around 10 acres of land looking out towards Mount Rainier, and we have a 2-car garage connected to a big workshop. And next to us is forest. All the things I will be describing has been spread out since we have lived on this property. Sometimes we hear screams coming from the forest, and all the wildlife becomes still and quiet. Occasionally, we've listened to what sounds like a metal chair scraping on a concrete floor in the distance that echoes over our land. I talked to the young man and his brother who currently live on the same lot but closer to the forest, and they told me that they hear it too, but stay in after dark because it feels like they are being watched. They all think that there is something off with this land. His brother also shared that he sees a demon boy, as he put it, in his room and other places in the house. I asked him why he calls him a demon, in which he replied, "Because he scares me and messes with my stuff." I really don't think it is a demon, but what he saw and what we saw in our house will be for another time to tell. As for the noises in the forest, I have compared these sounds to various wildlife indigenous to the area, but found nothing. This was when we first moved here on this property that is surrounded by farms. One late night, I was driving down the lonely road home lit only by a handful of streetlights when I saw a flash of eyes in the distance. Not wanting to hit what I thought might be a deer, I slowed down. When I arrived at where I thought it was gone. But the side of the headlight shined on something greyish-white, and I noticed something almost the size of a man crawling into the bushes. I saw its back muscles and shoulder blades and its back leg. There was no fur, no tail, and no feathers. Just a light-coloured, muscular creature. I quickly turned the corner, hoping to see it crawl out over the train tracks on the other side of the bushes. But it wasn't there. So I went home. I know what I saw. My headlights shined on it. I would try to compile all that we have seen all these 3 years. We know there is something going on with this land. My 2 adult children, my son's fiancée, and I have seen a tall, white creature. It stands about 7 feet tall with large eyes peeking around the workshop, revealing his head, chest, shoulder, arm with his hand on the wall, and part of its foot. Or it peeks into the garage window, and we have seen this on many occasions, a few times from my son's window upstairs. My daughter was here for a visit once. She thought she dropped something earlier out back when she was playing with the kids in the yard. It was dark, so she and my son went out there and they both had flashlights to find whatever it was she dropped. They were searching for a while when they heard something rustle in the tall grass behind them. She shined her light in the direction of the noise, and standing tall there in the field was that same creature, so they both ran like hell back to the house. She later moved out of state and has been over a year since this happened. So before I wrote this, I gave her a call. I didn't want her to lead the conversation, so I simply asked her what she remembered. She described that thing to a T, and went on by telling me about the time she saw it on the roof of the garage where both awnings meet. She stepped out onto the front porch, and something caught her eye over the garage. She said she stepped closer, and it tilted its head. My daughter then turned to tell her brother to look, and when she looked back, it was gone. Then, of course, she had to ask me, Don't you remember me telling you, and you thought I was on drugs or something? I do remember that, and I apologized. I don't think this, or these things, have ill intent. Or at least I would hope not. It's just scary. On an early evening, my son and his fiancée were leaving the garage from the side door, and my son locked eyes with this same thing crouched on all fours on a lawn couch outside my bedroom window. He said it was white, with pasty skin, and had a long neck and big round eyes that almost glowed. Its head stayed fixed on him and straight, but moved up and around clockwise and back like it was sizing him up like an owl. It was crouched with knees. It was not an owl. My son then started pushing his girl faster to the house. It was a while before he went back out there, never alone, and never at night. Just to let you know, we have never seen a raccoon or a squirrel on this property. Another time, I was on my front porch one evening. I let the dogs out one last time before bed and noticed that they were all acting skittish. They all did their thing and piled up in front of the front door with crazy eyes as if they wanted in now. Thinking it might be coyotes, I let them in and went to the end of the porch to see what frightened them. I keep a light on above my back door and another one further down on another area on the back of the house. Something was tall enough to block out the light casting its shadow on the wall of the garage. It couldn't have been a giant moth on the light because the shadow was cast by both lights. That gave me the creeps to think that something was standing right outside my back door. My granddaughter keeps her window blinds shut after dark. Even though there is no one around, she said she feels uneasy. We are not living in fear by any means, it's just different, you know? This hasn't been an everyday occurrence, but it is enough to take notice. I have no explanation as to what this is. At first, I blew it off, thinking it was just some sort of wildlife we didn't know about before. But after seeing these things for almost 3 years and getting validation from others, I know it is so much more. Maybe someday before we move and I ever get my hands on some proper camera equipment with night vision, I will share my findings. Thank you for reading. Part 2. It had nowhere to run. My daughter-in-law Athena and I were driving home from the store a few weeks ago, and it had not been dark too long. It's a rural area in Washington, so the houses are a little set back with a forest feel. The road we were driving down we have been on 1,000,000 times, so we know the surroundings very well. I also know to put my brights on so I can see deers. This was not a deer. As I got halfway down this road, I saw what looked like eyes reflecting off my headlights on the right in the distance, so I started to slow down. This prompted Athena to look up and see why I was slowing down, and she saw this too. As we got closer, we noticed that this thing wasn't shaped like a deer, and it seemed to be on 2 legs. It was tall and grey with an elongated face, and the eyes were elongated as well, with no nose or mouth that we could make out. Its eyes weren't shining yellow or white, but more like a grey and radiant blue. It stood tall with 2 long arms to its side, and as we slowly passed, it backed up into the tree line, staring directly at us. Not the car, but at us. Athena said, "Wait, what?" as we passed because there was nowhere for that thing to go. But it was totally gone. That sent shivers and a feeling of uneasiness over both of us for the rest of the night. The next day we got in the car and drove to the exact spot where we saw that thing because we had our doubts. But we're more confused than ever. Not only was there a very tall fence that extended that whole property, but it also had an additional 3-strand razor barb on top, making it impossible to jump over, and the fence was well intact. This reminded me of something I saw a few years back on a road not too far from this sighting. It was crawling into the bushes on the other side of the train tracks. Every day we pass there, we look with wonder. And the question we've asked each other was, what do you think would have happened if we had stopped? The question we also have is, was this a living being? Before I continue to the next story, I just want to say thank you for choosing to watch this video, and I hope you're enjoying my narration. If you are, please go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe to my channel if you don't already, and also leave a comment because that really helps with the YouTube algorithm and will really help my channel to grow. Thank you. Story 2. By Reddit user Noble Savage Indian. My ex-girlfriend and I were playing video games late one night at her father's house when she decided she wanted to go home. We were neighbours living in the country, and our homes were well within walking distance of each other. I noticed the time was 3 a.m. I continued playing a few matches with her brother before I too decided it was time to go home. At 3:30 a.m., I walked outside to pure darkness. The moon and the stars were missing. I could not see a thing, and noted that the many dogs that usually greet me before I leave were not there. The silence was odd. I assumed they followed my ex home. I waited for my eyes to adjust to the darkness before I left, but after what felt like 10 minutes, I could not see my hand in front of my face. I know the trail back well enough to walk it blind, so I did just that. There is a bush between her father's home and ours, and as I entered, I started to get this feeling of dread. All my senses were warning me of something I could not see. My anxiety was beginning to rise, but I steeled myself against my paranoia and kept going. Once I was out of the bush, I saw the outside light shining in the distance. About halfway down the trail, I heard this tremendous crashing sound behind me. The sounds of snapping branches and rustling weeds with a rumble of legs beating the ground. I turned around, thinking the dogs were coming to escort me home. I was wrong. This thing was no dog. Time seemed to slow as I realized this was nothing I've seen before. I still question if I actually saw anything. It was blacker than the night, a void in the shape of some sort of humanoid creature with a feline head. It is difficult to describe the absence of light having definition, but its black skin was stretched over a skeletal body. I'm a fairly tall man, and this thing's back looked like it was the height of my torso. The shock of the encounter startled me into making a pathetic noise that makes me feel emasculated when I think about it, but I quickly went into fight or flight, and I decided to fight. I stomped my foot in a display of aggression and put up my hands ready to hit this thing. It stopped 10 or so feet in front of me, and that's when I noticed it had hands. At mid-stride it paused and I saw it had black, long, slender fingers. For a moment, it stared at me, turned, and ran back to where it came from without making a sound. It had no tail, and I will always remember how graceful this thing looked running in the other direction. Its movements were so fluid. My adrenaline was peaked and I was making these deep, powerful breaths as I walked back inside. When I locked the door, I had this sensation wash over me, telling me that locking the door was a useless gesture. I had the sudden feeling that reality was porous and that safety was an illusion. I spoke with people about what I saw, and I'm told it was a water spirit. Elders in the area told me it's been there well before their grandparents first warned them of its presence. I'm told it's powerful and can be summoned by people who use bad medicine. One day, I gathered my courage and did a search of the bush. I found a swamp in the center of it. I never knew it was there in all my years living in that area. I love the night, but that encounter has me thinking twice before I go outside alone now. I bring a hunting knife with me, but I don't know if it will be any help against something like that. Nevertheless, I find comfort in my willingness to fight back if it ever attacked again. However, I do not know if it intended on harming me. Maybe it was sending me a message. I still can't explain where that claim of reality being porous came from. Story 3. By Reddit user A Drunk TP Supervisor. So a little background first. My friend lives in a fairly woodsy neighborhood in a more wealthy side of my town, so a lot of big houses that are spaced out from each other. He's told me numerous stories about the woods behind his house and about his neighborhood in general. I'll share a few, just to get you the gist of how eerie it is over there. One time he was walking down a path behind his house with his mum when he was younger, and they found a perfectly skinned cat, completely intact, about 5 minutes from the house. I even asked the mum about it one time when we were talking about creepy stuff, and she said it was true. Another time, he said him and his sister and her friend were really deep in the woods behind the house, and they found a polished cube with a pentagram carved into the front side, just sitting on a tree stump. Besides those two experiences, he's also mentioned things like weird satanic drawings spray painted on trees, and even a weird Illuminati-esque picture as well. I've even seen a few myself going back there with him and a few other buddies. Oh, and also, one time his garage door camera picked up a video of a completely nude man walk up to the garage door, stare at the camera, then walk away. All during a rainstorm. It was the weirdest fucking thing. Could have easily been a druggie, but who knows? He still has the video too. Anyways, with all that out of the way, I'll get to my experience, which happened 2 days ago. It was me, my friend, and my other buddy that was with us. We were driving around all night just chilling, shooting the shit, etc. It was around 2 in the morning when we pulled up to his house so he could grab some waters and snacks since we were all pretty hungry and broke. He went into his garage and then came back to the car 2 seconds later, saying he heard screaming coming from the woods. Calling his bluff and being pretty superstitious, I walked to the edge of the driveway and listened for whatever was in there. After a few minutes, I was going to walk back to the car when I heard an extremely low-pitched, raspy screech come from the wilderness. It almost sounded like an old man that smoked 3 packs of cigs a day wheezing, way off in the distance. This scared the fuck out of me, so I ran back to the car and told my friend to come and listen. Now, it was us two listening. We waited for a few, and then heard another scream. But this scream sounded completely different from the first. It was a higher pitch, and almost sounded like a woman. Friend 1 is kind of a pussy, so he noed back to the car after hearing this while I stayed and listened. Friend 2 came back out of his house and listened with me for the screams. It seemed like every 5 minutes we heard a new scream, different from the last. We sat in his car in the driveway after this with the windows down just listening for new sounds. After about 20 minutes, whatever it was f***ed off, and we didn't hear anything else. We Googled different Native American animal distress and mating calls, but couldn't find anything that compared to what we heard. At first we thought it might have been a fox or a fisher cat, but it most definitely wasn't. Anyone have any explanation? Story 4. By Reddit user Mr. Ghost Work. I will preface this by stating that the information I'm about to share with you is not a creepypasta or any other form of fiction. It is in fact my complete and honest recollection of the unexplained experiences I observed in and around the wooded area behind my childhood home. Other people in my family noted much of the same while growing up there, and our stories match now that we are all decades older. I'm not saying I believe in skinwalkers, Sasquatches, or any other cryptids. As a man of science, I cannot ignore the lack of reliable and testable evidence in regards to such creatures actually existing. That being said, something very terrifying and unexplained lived or lives in the woods behind that house. Occurrence 1. My sister and I had just received a tent as a gift from our grandfather. He had smoked enough Marlboro cigarettes and sent in the UPCs to get a massive Marlboro tent. My mum hated it. We, however, loved it and immediately set it up on the property line behind the house. We intended on spending the night out there, but after about an hour or so, we experienced something neither of us can explain to this day. We saw an indention drag itself across the tent and heard it dragging as it went. It was like a giant finger or maybe a log, something of that size. My sister cried out, and I immediately bolted outside as I was convinced it was our father playing a prank on us. Upon exiting the tent, I was greeted by nothing. There was nothing there. I searched the area briefly before grabbing my sister and going inside for the evening. About a week later, I ventured out to the tent again, only to realize it was gone. I ran inside and asked my mother where the tent was, and she replied that she had thrown it away because it had tears in it. Confused, I tried to convince myself that she was lying and had just tossed it out because she was anti-smoking and thought the tent looked trashy. But I fear she was telling the truth. Occurrence 2. One full morning, about an hour before my alarm for school went off, I was jolted out of bed with what I can only describe as an otherworldly shriek. It came from the woods. It didn't sound human, but it didn't sound animal either. Foxes and coyotes live in those woods, but they don't make those kinds of sounds. It was insanely loud. Occurrence 3. One evening, my father and I were up late having one of our classic all-night arguments. As we finally wrapped up our fight around 3 a.m., my father said he wanted to read a verse from the Bible in order to close on a positive note of peace. As he began to read aloud, that same, or at least very similar, otherworldly shriek boomed from the house. It had to be just outside the kitchen window, but it was so loud that it sounded almost like it was in the house. We immediately ran around the house trying to find what the hell made such a sound, and even awoke my siblings and mother, who helped in the confused search. After about half an hour, we all just sort of gave up and went to bed, scratching our heads. Occurrence 4. In my senior year of high school, I got a cat. She was an outside cat, but we would let her into the garage to sleep every night, mostly due to the coyotes and potentially bad weather and whatnot. She would always come home before we shut the garage doors, because she didn't want to be locked out. One night, she didn't show. I didn't think much of it, as cats sometimes go on long hunting, mating, etc. excursions only to return in 2 or 3 days like nothing happened. I assumed this was the case. After not seeing her for a week, I went and explored the area behind my house, the fields, and of course the woods. I think I found her. I say I think, because I honestly couldn't tell. It looked like her, but she had been seemingly turned inside out. I stared at the remains for about a minute, before turning back and going home. I know this was a long read, and if you've stuck it out, I thank you for your time and interest. If you can shed any light on what kind of animal or being or whatever, please don't hesitate to share or speculate. My family, especially myself, would love to know exactly what was in those woods. Story 5. By Reddit user JC15. This is my first time posting, but I've been curious for years if anyone has ever seen the creature that crossed my path in the suburbs of Philadelphia. I'm pretty sure I was a senior in high school, so it was around 2011. My group of friends and I were always obsessed with haunted, creepy things and places. I think our interest began as kids. We lived across the street from an abandoned mental asylum that we would regularly sneak into. So, naturally, when we heard about Downington's twin tunnels, we were psyched to go. This place is still on a drivable road. It's 2 attached tunnels, with one active tunnel and one completely grown over with bushes and water, kind of like a swamp. They are pretty long and curved, so there is a point in the tunnel where no light can enter, making it pitch black. Legend has it there have been some deaths and murders there. Supposedly, a pregnant woman hung herself from the middle of the tunnels, and years later in the 90s, there was a woman's body chopped up and found stuffed in a suitcase, which was placed in the tunnels. So, According to folklore, if you walk through the tunnels at night, you emerge from the other end with scratches on your arms. Or, if you drive through it, as we did, you could hear the feet of the suicidal pregnant woman dangling on the top of your car. So, we go. I'm driving. We drive through a few times, park in the middle, turn the lights and car off, roll down the windows, and wait to see. Anything. It's a bust at first, and since I'm driving, I'm ready to call it a night. But a friend eagerly says one more try. So, that's what we do. I park in the middle, turn the lights and car off, and sit there silently waiting for something to happen. Now, since this is still an active tunnel, I remind you I have my key in the ignition ready to be turned on in an instant, so that if a car comes speeding down, I can quickly turn the car on and flash the lights to let them know we're here. So, I'm staring at the mouth of the tunnel when all of a sudden I see a dark figure walk across the mouth of it. I'm amazed, mind you. Almost don't believe it until it turns into the tunnel and starts walking directly towards the car. I can only describe it as an extremely tall humanoid figure with broad shoulders, long arms that dangle almost down to its knees, and a rectangular-shaped head with no distinguishing features. Just completely black. At this point, it's getting closer, and I'm so freaked out that I instinctively turn the car on. The lights flash on, and the thing vanishes. I immediately turn to my friend and he says, "Did you just see that?" And I reply, "Yes." Although it feels nice to have another person validate what I had just seen, it has left me completely uneasy for years. So, I'm asking anyone out there, can you explain this? Have you ever seen anything like that? Story 6. By Reddit user GlassTechnology599. First of all, I've grown up and dealt with paranormal things like shadow people, things moving without anyone touching them, etc., and I swear this is a legit story. A year ago, in May in 2020, my parents were going on their annual trip to Florida with my 3 brothers for the week. My mother asked me if I could go by their house and feed the family dogs, or stay and house sit. Being the daughter I am, I told my mother I would just stay at their house and save on gas. Throughout the week, at night, I would bring the 2 dogs inside to feel safer since my parents live on a somewhat back road. Keep in mind my parents' house is surrounded by trees, and there is a thick tree line separating their house from the 2 neighbours. Well, one night while I was at the house alone, I had called my best friend Bailey to come over and stay the night. We were going to do what 2 middle-aged 20-year-old females do when alone: play video games, watch movies, TikToks, and drink a little. While Bailey and I were in the kitchen around 3 or 4 a.m. making homemade funnel cakes like the fat asses we are, the dogs kept moving around and staring at the glass kitchen door that led off to the back porch. I asked Bailey to let them out so they could chill, and we would have enough legroom while we were cooking. While we were eating our funnel cakes, we came across a TikTok about making homemade temporary tattoos with a printed picture and perfume. Now, keep in mind my parents have about 3.82 acres of land, so there is a family house, my father's 2-door garage workshop, and a large pole barn. Those 2 buildings are further out near the tree line, so Bailey and I walk down to the workshop to go to my parents' work office. I punch in a code to the garage door and we go inside to the computer and print out each other a picture of Kylo Ren to try and make intertemporary tattoos for each other. Before I go any further, a little side note. My parents have security cameras all around their property, and inside the office is a television above the desk showing all of the live footage from the cameras. So, while I was cutting out the tattoo for Bailey, she says, "What is that?" I stop cutting and look up at the cameras. At first, I didn't see anything except a small figure in front of the pole barn. It looked like it was sniffing at the garage door. I shrugged it off and told her it was probably one of the many stray dogs that roamed around the area. Bailey nudged my arm quickly after I said that and pointed to the screen again. Wanting to prove to her it was just a stray dog, I stood up and looked closer to the screen. When I did, I saw the figure, but it didn't look like one of the small dogs. The creature was hunched over on all fours. Its arms were super thin and long but pointing outwards from its chest. Kind of like how you imagine that bitch from The Exorcist to be when she crawled on all fours. It had no fur. Its skin looked tight on its body. And when I went to go and open the door to look at it, Bailey stopped me right when I grabbed the lock on the door. Looking back at the screen of the creature, it looked like it scratched the door of the pole barn. I immediately said, "What the f*** is that?" And the creature turned its head straight at the camera, like it was in a scene from The Office. When its head turned, I couldn't make out clear facial features, but it looked like it had a human head with two big glowing eyes. Bailey and I screamed and it bolted off the screen. Clearly freaked out, Bailey and I hugged each other like that would protect us. Then, something smashed against the garage door. Not once, but twice. Like, you know what it sounds like for someone to smack a garage door from the outside with their hand? Yeah, just like that. I called my grandmother and told her we thought we saw something and to stay on the phone with us until we ran into the house. Once we got into the house, we brought the dogs in, locked every single door, and took shots of Crown until we fell asleep. Now, we talked about this a few times, and I think it was a Wendigo, but Bailey thinks it was a skinwalker. But now people on Reddit are saying it was probably a crawler. Thoughts, anyone? Thank you for watching and or listening to this video. Again, if you enjoyed it, please go ahead and hit the like button, and if you don't already, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and select the notification bell so you don't miss out on any future uploads. Also, please leave a comment on this video letting me know what you thought of it. Comments really help with the YouTube algorithm and will really help my channel to grow. If you have a story you would like me to narrate, please email it to me at mrsinisterstories@gmail.com. I have recently passed 50,000 subscribers on this channel, so I'm halfway to my next major milestone. Thank you to everyone who is continuing to subscribe to this channel and contributing to its growth by liking videos and leaving comments. Once I get to 100,000 subscribers, my plan is to reward you all with an epic video with over 3 hours of original content. If that is the sort of thing you want to hear, please keep helping this channel to grow. If you want to support my channel even further, there are a number of ways you can do so. You can consider leaving me a tip for this video via my PayPal. Link is included in the description. Check out my Teespring store and consider purchasing one of my shirt designs. I have a design with a Dogman, Wendigo and Skinwalker and Bigfoot on a zebra crossing. It's a must for anyone that loves these type of stories. Also, on Audible there is a book, Punch, by J.R. Park that I narrated. I do get a small royalty if you decide to purchase that. It's a revenge/a horror novel that was a lot of fun to narrate. I'd like to do more of that in the future at some point. Thanks again.